Well, we had so much fun this morning jumping back and forth between passages. I thought we'd do the same thing tonight. We haven't been talking much about 1st and 2nd Chronicles as we've been going through 1st and 2nd Kings. Are you familiar at all with the connections between them? I know as Mark and Lisa read through Scripture every year, they probably notice that they're reading a lot of the same stuff when they get to Chronicles. 1st and 2nd Kings were written before the exile into Babylon. 1st and 2nd Chronicles were probably written after the exile in Babylon. And they're very, very similar, slightly different. Some more details in one than the other. So if you compare the two, sometimes you'll come up with more information than you would just looking at one of them. It's a little bit like the Gospels, where you've got 3 Gospels that are extremely similar, and then a period of time later, John wrote his, and it's very different than the other 3. So 1st and 2nd Kings have a lot of the same information as 1st and 2nd Chronicles, but there's a difference in authorship and a difference in some of the things that are included. And we're talking about the son of King Hezekiah, Manasseh. We mentioned earlier that the southern nation of Judah lasted 100 and some odd years longer than the northern nation of Israel, which was capital of Samaria, mainly because there were some good kings in Judah that kind of pushed the calendar back a little bit. Judah was not conquered by Assyria. When Assyria conquered Samaria, they came down and almost did in the days of Hezekiah, but eventually had to withdraw. It won't be until a couple of generations after Hezekiah until we start getting into that time frame when Babylon is very, very strong, and they're eventually going to come and conquer Judah. But the difference between Samaria being conquered in the 600s BC and Judah being conquered in the 500s BC are these 2 kings. We've already talked about one, Hezekiah, and we'll get around to the other one tonight, and that's King Josiah. Chapter 21 of 2 Kings. Look down, and boy, I hope it says something like this in verse 5. Yes, that's where we are. 2 Kings 21, not 1 Kings 22. In the 2 courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to all the starry hosts. He sacrificed his own son in the fire, practiced divination, sought omens, consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord and aroused God's anger. Okay, so just the list in and of itself. There's a lot more in the text that you could look at. But this list tells you what kind of guy he was. Okay? His mother's name was Hephzibah. We don't have one of those passages where it says, and he was a good king like his father David. We just know that his mother was Queen Consort Hephzibah. He was 12 years old when he took the throne. So he's a kid. So his mom is basically in charge of the kingdom. A lot of Near Eastern kingdoms had that. When you're looking at the Ethiopian eunuch worked for Candace, the queen mother, because the son, who was actually the king in Ethiopia at the time, was way too holy to be involved with affairs of state. So the queen mothers were in charge. So that guy came to Jerusalem and worshiped and was going back to work for Candace. She wasn't the queen as in she was married to the king. She was the queen as in her son was the king. Right? And so that's kind of what we've got going on in some of these. But he sacrificed his own son in the fire. So that's either Molech or Chemosh, the gods of the Amorites and the Ammonites. Verse 7, he took the carved Asherah pole he made, and he put it in the temple of which the Lord had said to David and to his son Solomon, in this temple and in Jerusalem which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelites wander from the land I gave their ancestors, if only they will be careful to do everything I commanded them, and will keep the whole law that my servant Moses gave them. But the people did not listen. Manasseh led them astray, so that they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. When they came in across the desert, and the Lord was telling them, when you get there, kill everybody. Right? It hurts our sensibilities, does it not? We have to ask the question, why would God kill all the men, all the women, all the children, all the animals in Jericho? Well, they were extraordinarily evil people. And here, in the reign of Manasseh, in Judah, at the temple, he's more wicked than the people that God uprooted to give them the land. That's a terrible epitaph. If that's who you were as king, and that's how you're remembered, then it's a horrible thing. I want to just touch on it and not get too deep into it. But when you put a carved Asherah pole in the temple, what does that mean? The temple became a religious shrine, as in shrine prostitutes, as in worship of a foreign deity in the temple. The people of Israel had a problem in understanding who God really was. And so sometimes it'll say that they worshiped God, but they still had the high places, or they worshiped God, but they still bowed down to Molech, or they still put their kids in the fire, those kind of things. They got it all jumbled in together at times. So it says they were worshiping Yahweh, but there were components of other gods sprinkled in there. During the reign of Solomon, he builds the temple, but he also builds temples and shrines for all of his wives' gods. So if you're the people of Israel, how confusing is it to say, well, I worship Yahweh, but I'm building a temple to whoever. Right? So people of Israel were confused a lot of the time. Now roll that forward to our generation. When you say God, what do people think that means? Most people don't know the name Yahweh. If you say Jehovah, they might understand that name. But when you say Jehovah, what do they conjure up in their minds? When you hear people complaining about what they think they know about God or about the Bible, how often is it just nonsense? They don't know what they're talking about at all. But we live in a nation that says we're a godly people, we belong to God, but we don't really know what that means. Well, the Israelites suffered with the same kinds of problems. 2 Chronicles 33. We don't get this in 2 Kings. This bit of information is only in Chronicles. So after the exile, they come back and the historians are looking through the information that they have, and they realize that here's a part of the story that needs to be told. How bad was Manasseh? Well, he was horrible. But what if Manasseh changed his mind? Okay. The Lord brought Manasseh, or brought against him the army of the commanders of the king of Assyria. This is verse 11. And they took Manasseh prisoner. They put a hook in his nose, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. Okay. I think it's odd that it says they took him to Babylon. Again, we're not in the phase where Babylon is the strength, and it's the Assyrian commander that's arresting him. But anyway, that's what I've got in my translation, that they took him off into Babylon. Notice that they put a hook in his nose. I think what we're talking about here is that kind of thing you put on a cow, right? You put that ring in his nose, and they dragged him along by his nose in the procession, so that when they get back home and they're going through the streets of their hometown and people are cheering them as conquering heroes, they've got their chief prisoner by the nose on a hook, dragging him through town to show him how powerful they are. Okay? In his distress, he sought the favor of the Lord his God. What did that mean to him, the Lord his God? Well, evidently he figured out he needed to be talking to Jehovah, to Yahweh. And God, he sought the favor of the Lord his God and humbled himself greatly before the God of his ancestors. When he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem to his kingdom. So God moves the Assyrians to set him free, probably at a very high price. We're not told what it cost him. You remember Hezekiah emptied out the treasuries to the Assyrian government already. Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. He got rid of the foreign gods, removed the image from the temple, as well as all the altars that he built on the temple hill and in Jerusalem, and he threw them out of the city. He restored the altar of the Lord, and he sacrificed fellowship offerings and thank you offerings, and he told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. The people, however, continued to sacrifice at the high places, but only to the Lord their God. So the high places are still there, the high places that used to be where they went to worship Baal, Asherah, Molech, Chemosh, whoever else. Maybe that the god that was the calf, the golden calf. You know, they go up to the high places. Well, now we've taken down all of those idols, but we go to the same place we used to go to worship that idol, and now we worship God there. Are they confused? Oh, yeah. They're not sure what they're worshiping. They don't know what they're doing. They're just making sacrifices to whoever the king said they could worship up on that hill, so that's where they're going. So that's the kind of condition Judah is in. Now, he dies kind of back in favor with God, and he has a son named Ammon. Ammon takes over as king and runs everything back to where Manasseh was before he repented. He was 22 when he became king. He reigned in Jerusalem 2 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, as his father Manasseh had done. Ammon worshipped and offered sacrifices to all the idols Manasseh had made. But unlike his father Manasseh, he did not humble himself before the Lord, and Ammon increased his guilt. Ammon's officials conspired against him and assassinated him in his palace after 2 years. The people of the land killed everyone who had plotted against King Ammon and made Josiah the king in his place. Okay? So, mixed up politics, mixed up religion. Ammon is evil in a lot of ways that we would look at and go, okay, he's evil and he's bringing back idolatry and he's reinstating all the things that Manasseh did early on. But I don't think that's why he gets assassinated. Right? Manasseh reigned a long time doing the same things. Why did they suddenly decide that they want to kill Ammon? He must have been bad in more than one way. Right? So he's unfit religiously. He's evidently unfit politically, and so his political opponents kill him. They're going to insert somebody else, perhaps, a political coup, put in their hope for the future. But Ammon has a son, and the son is only 8 years old. But they save Josiah, and they put him in as king. His mother is now going to be Queen Mother and help lead this 8-year-old as the king over Judah. The people of Judah round up the folks that killed his daddy Ammon, and they kill all of them. Right? So the coup is undone. Whoever it was they thought they were going to put in as king, all of them get killed, and now we have an 8-year-old as king. So since Hezekiah, we've had a son and a grandson that were terrible for the kingdom. Manasseh comes back and he repents at the end, but by the time he repents, his son is already a grown-up, right? He's already coming up. He's 22 years old, so maybe he's in his teens or, getting on up there by the time daddy dies or by the time daddy repents, gets things right. So he goes right back to the way things were. When he's gone, we get the great-great-grandson, who is 8 years old. His mom's name is Jedediah or Jedidah, the daughter of Adiah. She's from Bozkath. I don't know where that is either, right? But we get all that information. Why do we get that information? These are important women. Their generation, the generations perhaps around their time frame, would have known those names, would have known those places, and would have said, that they did so well or they did so poorly. They would have hung some of that either claim to fame or disclaimer on the mother, because the mother was Queen Mother. All right. He converts to Yahweh worship when he's 16. So as soon as he's old enough to start making decisions, he converts to worshiping our God, the one true God. And he starts some major reforms by the time he's 20. Right? So Ammon comes in at 22, is horrible, is killed at 24. But his son comes in at 8. By the time he's 16, he is a Yahweh worshiper. And by the time he's 20, he starts some major reforms. So look at 2 Chronicles 34. 2 Chronicles 34. And we'll start in verse 4. Well, let's just start in 3. In the 8th year of his reign, while he was still young, he began to seek the God of his father David. In his 12th year, he began to purge Judah and Jerusalem of high places, Asherah poles, and idols. And under his direction, the altars of the Baals were torn down. He cut to pieces the incense altars that were above them, and smashed the Asherah poles and the idols. These he broke to pieces and scattered over the graves of those who had sacrificed to them. All right, let's run back over to 2 Kings and see what the original text said in 2 Kings, chapter 23. Mm-hmm. 22. Josiah was 8 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 31 years. His mother's name was Jedidah, daughter of Adiah, who was from Bozkath. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and followed completely the ways of his father David, not turning aside to the right or left. In the 18th year of his reign, King Josiah sent the secretary Shaphan, son of Uzziah, the son of Meshullam, to the temple of the Lord. He said, "Go to Hilkiah, the high priest, and have him get ready the money that's been brought into the temple of the Lord, which the doorkeepers have collected from the people. Have them entrust it to the men appointed to supervise the work of the temple. Have these men pay the workers who repair the temple of the Lord, the carpenters, the builders, and the masons. Also have them purchase timber and dress stone to repair the temple. They need not account for the money entrusted to them. They are honest in their dealings." Okay, so Josiah wants to make sure that the temple is redone and put back in order. And while they're renovating the temple, he reinstates the celebration of the Passover. And this is huge. So 2 Kings 23, 21. The king gave order to all the people to celebrate the Passover to the Lord your God, as it is written in this book of the covenant. So it's referred to 2 or 3 different ways. It's referred to as the book of the law. It's referred to as the book. And here it's referred to the book of the covenant. Neither in the days of the judges who led Israel, nor in the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed. And I read that first to mean that they had just stopped doing Passover. And I read it again, and I think what the author is trying to tell us is that this Passover was so special that the reinstating of Passover was well received by the people, and they made it a very special Passover. But I also think it's true that in the time of the judges and in the early kingdom years, you don't see it discussed. So Passover, which was the thing that tied them to the Lord, right? You had 2 feasts that were just, you had to have them, right? You've got the feast of the Passover, where you're reminded that God chose you and brought you up out of Egypt. And you've got the Day of Atonement, where you're reminded that you have sin and that God is forgiving your sin through this Passover or through this scapegoat ceremony, right? So you're offering sacrifices to God. You're sending the scapegoat out into the countryside with your sins. And all of those things were, that was part and parcel of what it meant to be Jewish. These days, there's a saying, if you're Jewish and you're living away from Jerusalem, it became customary to say next year in Jerusalem. Right? So we'll do Passover where we have to this year, but next year, Passover in Jerusalem. They hadn't had Passover in years. They didn't know how, because the book of the law, the book of the covenant, had been missing for all these years. It was in the temple, but so were temple prostitutes and Asherah poles and all kinds of nonsense. So the people thought they knew God but didn't know God, and then they had forgotten how to celebrate God. They didn't even know how to worship anymore. So once they find the book, then Josiah begins to make these reforms and to demand that they keep Passover. And when they keep Passover, it is unlike any that they had had in years and years and years. Okay. 4, during the renovation of the temple, and they locate the book of the law of the Lord. Is it the Pentateuch, the Torah, the first 5 books? It doesn't say specifically what they are, but at this time they would not have had the prophets, right? They would not have had books like Ruth. They wouldn't have had a lot of the books that when we count the Old Testament books, they wouldn't have had a lot of them. But they would have had the law. So the books of the law would have been Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So they would learn about God creating the world. They would learn about the flood. They would learn about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. They would learn about the Egyptian captivity and Passover. And then they would learn about God giving them the land, running everybody out, and establishing them in the land, along with all the laws that went to govern them while they were living in the land. So they needed to know more about how to handle this book that they had received. So look at 2 Chronicles 34. 2 Chronicles 34. And verse 19 is where we want to start, I hope. Yes. When the king heard these words of the law, he tore his robes. He gave these orders to Hilkiah, Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, Abdon, son of Micah, Shaphan, the secretary, and Asaiah, the king's attendant. He said, go and inquire of the Lord for me and for the remnant in Israel and Judah about what is written in this book that has been found. Great is the Lord's anger that is poured out on us, because those who have gone before us have not kept the word of the Lord. They have not acted in accordance with all that is written in the book. Okay, go and inquire the word of the Lord. Where do you go to get the word of the Lord? To a prophet, right? So when you think prophet, give me some names. Who are the prophets? Samuel was the first great prophet, yeah? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, those guys, okay? Here's one you don't hear mentioned as often. Hilkiah and those the king had sent with him went to speak to the prophet Huldah, who was the wife of Shallum, son of Tokhath, the son of Hazrah, the keeper of the wardrobe. She lived in Jerusalem in the new quarter. Go ask Huldah. If you want the word of the Lord in Josiah's day, go ask Huldah. Right? How famous is Huldah? Not very, right? She had one little job to do, and she does it well. She calls them to account, tells them that they need to repent. Josiah is going to do the things that Huldah recommends to him. He holds her in high regard. I noticed that, at least in the new NIV, it says the prophet Huldah. How does yours describe her? Is there another syllable? Is she the prophet or the prophetess? Prophetess. See, here again, the new NIV is gender inclusive. So you get this phrase, they went to the prophet Huldah. And you might say, well, that's an odd name. You know, this guy who's named Huldah. But the next sentence helps you out and says she is the wife. So that's how you find out that she's actually a female, at least in the new NIV. One of the things that she sends back to Josiah perhaps one of the most important things for Josiah himself, is that Israel has been too bad too long. But because you're king, I'm not going to destroy them yet. Right? So we've had this theme that's run through the time of the kingdom and even back into the Judges a little bit, that things are bad, but because you're there, I'm going to honor the kingdom. Right? Sometimes it's, I won't let the kingdom be overthrown in honor of David. Sometimes it's, I won't let the kingdom be overthrown because you're doing the right thing. So Josiah repents, and he brings everybody together, and he has the law read to the people. So we get out of this ignorance is bliss stage, at least for a little while, in that if you were there, you know what the law says. There were generations who didn't, who were confused about who God is, but on that day that Josiah had everybody come and listen and had the law read to them. Right? So now you're without excuse. Now you know what the law says, you know who God is, and you know how he's connected to Israel. So you know all the stuff that your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents should have taught you, but didn't. Right? So he gets things kind of back where they're supposed to be. But she promises him, right, not during your reign. Well, what does that tell you? It's coming soon, right? Not during your reign, but soon. So we've seen, I'm not going to take the dynasty away from you, but I'll take it away from your son. Right? I'm not going to let the enemy attack during your reign, but during the reign of your son. So we've seen that more than once. This is the same kind of thing. Josiah did the right thing. He led the people well. So he's not going to be deposed. He's not going to be led out of town with a hook in his nose. He's going to get to live out his life and be king. Now, if you're looking at Chronicles, let's see if they have it in here. Let's just read the last little bit of 34 and then a little bit of 35. Josiah removed all the detestable idols from all the territory belonging to the Israelites. He had all who were present in Israel serve the Lord their God as long as he lived. They did not fail to follow the Lord, the God of their ancestors. And then run over to 35:20. After all of this, when Josiah had set the temple in order, Necho, king of Egypt, went up to fight at Carchemish on the Euphrates, and Josiah marched out to meet him in battle. But Necho sent messengers to him, saying, "What quarrel is there, king of Judah, between you and me? It is not you and I, or it is not you I am attacking at this time, but the house with which I am at war. God has told me to hurry, so stop opposing God, who is with me, or he will destroy you." Josiah, however, would not turn away from him, but disguised himself to engage him in battle. He would not listen to what Necho had said at God's command, but went to fight him on the plains of Megiddo. Archers shot King Josiah, and he told his officers, "Take me away, I'm badly wounded." So they took him out of the chariot, put him in his other chariot, and brought him to Jerusalem, where he died. He was buried in the tomb of his ancestors, and all of Judah and Jerusalem mourned for him. Jeremiah composed laments for Josiah, and to this day all the male and female singers commemorate Josiah in those laments. These became a tradition in Israel and are written in the laments. The other events of Josiah's reign and his acts of devotion in accordance with what was written in the law of the Lord, all the events from beginning to end, are written in the book of the kings of Israel and Judah.